Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today, it centers on the philosophy of success, resilience, and discipline. And we're drawing this from autobiographical material detailing Matthew McConaughey's unique upbringing and his later career decisions. The material is pretty striking, I think, because it emphasizes two really intense, often linked concepts: this relentless hustle culture and a demanding, high expectations form of familial love, often called hard love. So the core question for us, really emerging from these excerpts, it's fundamentally about causation. And, can you generalize this? Does the philosophy rooted in extreme intensity, the hustle culture and the hard love discipline, does that inherently create the resilient mindset needed for real transformation? Or does this same intensity introduce significant structural risks to well-being and long-term adaptation? I'll be arguing that this rigorous, high-pressure approach served as a kind of necessary crucible, that it was maybe the only way to forge the unique character and resilience required not just to succeed, but to fundamentally transform an entire public identity.
And I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. Look, while the results in McConaughey's life are clearly exceptional, I'll be exploring let's say, the high-risk aspects of this method. I really want to question the general advisability of adopting such extreme intensity as a sort of universal blueprint, especially when you look closely at the potential hidden costs. Things like shunning rest, demanding constant action, and using pretty volatile disciplinary methods.
Okay, but the formula presented in the material is remarkably clear, even if it's demanding. It basically states that ambition and resistance are inseparable. They go hand in hand. And that true success requires enduring turbulence instead of, and this is his phrase, pulling the parachute too early. And, this isn't just some feel-good rhetoric. It's a philosophy validated by some extreme professional choices. I mean, think about that 20-month period where he refused massive paychecks. We're talking offers from, $8 million up to $14.5 million, just to pivot away from romantic comedies and really establish his dramatic integrity. That kind of self-denial, that long-term vision, it requires a profoundly ingrained capacity for endurance. That's a character trait that has to be built from the ground up, when you say. It seems to prove that the lessons of tenacity translated directly into real-world integrity and transformation. And furthermore, the rigorous enforcement of that hustle culture, treating sleep like a sin, actively avoiding passive stuff like TV in favor of going out and doing, that instilled the fundamental, I'd say necessary lesson that hustle maximizes your natural gifts. Discipline, which was often immediate and sometimes physical, wasn't really meant to punish in the long term. It was intended to build resilience by teaching immediate consequence and recovery. Take the pain, move on. This is how you forge the type of character that can actually face prolonged, severe professional resistance.
I agree the results are exceptional, yes. But exceptional results often come from outlier conditions, right? Not necessarily generalized formulas. So I still maintain that the means described carry significant and, frankly, potentially unnecessary risks if we're holding this up as a model for, broad development. We really have to look at the mechanics of that household. It implemented some highly volatile methods. Physical discipline, strictly forbidding really powerful words like can't or hate. Now, while the linguistic reframing, saying just having trouble instead of can't, that's productive in isolation, sure. But linking that correction to immediate punishment, the licks, that teaches immediate compliance, but it often comes at the expense of maybe nuanced emotional self-assessment or regulation. The child learns to perform the correct language, perhaps, rather than actually process the complex feeling underneath. Right?
Unsustainable for the vast majority of people. It just ignores the critical, well-established role of necessary rest and reflection in cognitive health, memory consolidation, everything. So it raises a pretty serious question for me. Did success happen because of this extreme intensity? Or did it maybe happen despite the methodology, perhaps thanks to other powerful mitigating factors like the unconditional love, which, they also clearly received? And when achievements were immediately humbled, trophies downplayed, that sort of thing, it creates an environment where high performance is mandatory, but external validation is structurally restricted. That places immense, almost crushing, internal pressure on identity formation.
Okay, but let's focus on that extreme intensity for a moment. Because I really argue it is the necessary engine here. It's what separates just performing from actually transforming. So I defend the necessity of that extreme hustle culture as a way of forging identity from within, focused on internal character, perseverance, making the individual independent of external approval, essentially. The drive instilled was absolute. Why watch someone else live when you can live it yourself? This refusal to be passive, it forces active engagement with life. It teaches an essential lesson. Your identity is defined by what you do and what you endure, not just what you're given. So when the going gets hard, and it inevitably will in any ambitious pursuit, this deeply ingrained drive is maybe the only thing that separates those who succeed from those who quit. And quitting, in this philosophy, seems to be defined as settling for comfort when integrity demands endurance.
That's a compelling argument for active engagement, I grant you that. But I think we need to challenge that somewhat binary definition of quit. Does quitting always mean abandoning the goal entirely, or could it sometimes mean adapting the methodology? I tend to believe the core lesson of resilience isn't just nonstop effort, it's also about adaptive recovery. It's knowing when and how to rest, and importantly, how to synthesize experience. The shunning of rest, the prohibition of passive, reflective activities, it ignores critical psychological complexity, doesn't it? If you are constantly in doing mode, where is the space for reflection, for synthesis? If every achievement is immediately downplayed, as the material describes, you surely need time to internally process what that achievement means to you, outside of the drive for the next task. This relentless demand for action limits the ability to process experience outside of that continuous hustle. You call it forging character. I worry it could be creating a kind of psychological debt.
I'm not entirely convinced that reflection needs to come in the form of, say, passive entertainment or long periods of rest. Active reflection can happen right in the midst of work, or physical activity even. The philosophical focus here was on integrity and immediate consequence, which I think brings us directly to the methods of discipline and this idea of hard love. That immediate action, the discipline, was the mechanism for reinforcing integrity. The system seemed designed to stop bad habits instantly and force self-correction, not really allow for brooding or self-pity.
Okay. That is precisely where I see the highest structural risk, because the material describes a, let's face it, volatile environment. The system relied on corporal punishment alongside the high emotional intensity of parents who fought violently only to reconcile just as passionately, often right afterwards. This tough but loving environment, while yes, undeniably cushioned by constant verbal affirmation, those ritual I love yous were clearly important, it still relies on a level of emotional and physical intensity that is fundamentally volatile. So we have to ask, are these volatile methods really required for building adaptive resilience? Or do they perhaps instead cultivate an extreme tolerance for chaos, for emotional swings, maybe making stable, predictable environments feel, unnerving or less stimulating later in life? I worry the mechanism of instruction was the chaos, and the love merely served to mitigate the potential damage.
Well, I see why you emphasize the volatility of the parental relationship in isolation. But let me try and reframe the focus slightly. The family's approach was fundamentally about integrity and consequence, not just chaos. They strictly forbade lies, right? Reinforcing self-respect and truth above almost everything else. And discipline was given instead of grounding. The method emphasized taking the pain, whatever it was, and moving on quickly. That arguably prevents the resentment and prolonged disengagement that grounding can often cause. And the material stresses repeatedly that despite the harshness, McConaughey and his brothers always had that undercurrent of unconditional love. Now, that love wasn't just some mitigating factor. I'd argue it was the secure emotional base that allowed for such high expectations and intense pressure in the first place.
The lesson seemed to be, high performance and character are mandatory, yes, but your fundamental worth isn't conditional on them. That distinction, I think, makes the difference between potential trauma and effective tough love. They weren't just chaotic, they were intensely present and demanded honesty.
I absolutely agree that the love and presence were foundational, crucial, no argument there. But let's clarify the mechanism of resilience again. Did the licks, the physical discipline, actually build the resilience? or that the secure knowledge of unconditional love simply allow him to survive the licks and the accompanying emotional intensity. Because if we try to generalize this methodology, most applications out there will lack that foundational, consistent, fierce love. And then you're left only with the volatility and the high pressure, which sounds more like a recipe for breakdown to me.
But we can see the ultimate proof, I think, that the internal mechanism worked when we look at the career choices he made. That seems like the most potent, almost empirical evidence for the value of this mindset. Refusing those enormous sums of money, forsaking immediate gratification on a massive scale, that feels like a direct application of the endurance learned in childhood. That act bought him, as he put it, a one-way ticket out of Hollywood typecasting. He seemed to have internalized the lesson that integrity and long-term commitment to self-worth simply must supersede immediate, market-driven, monetary rewards. Enduring those 20 months with essentially no offers, that demonstrates a powerful, unwavering commitment to self-definition over market definition. It really shows that endurance is greater than immediate gratification in this framework.
That's an interesting point, and the endurance displayed is certainly undeniable. However, I must press the point on generalizability again here. This level of professional integrity, this particular move, hinged on a very high-stakes gamble that requires a significant economic safety net, a net that frankly few people possess. I mean, we're admiring a strategic move that required the actor to forgo something like $14.5 million in income over a 20-month period. Now, while that is a powerful measure of resilience, yes, it's also a measure of the financial capital, the buffer that enabled him to take that risk in the first place. For someone trying to pivot careers midlife, say, or really anyone without substantial assets, enduring 20 months without any offers isn't some strategic gamble. It's potentially catastrophic financial failure. So you're generalizing, I think, a high-risk strategy that worked for a specific person in a specific high-reward context, a context where the potential for a massive payout, the career transformation, arguably justified the wait. For the vast majority of people, resilience is needed most acutely by those without that kind of capital cushion, making this blueprint impractical and potentially quite damaging if generalized too broadly.
I disagree that the economic component completely invalidates the philosophical lesson, though. The lesson learned was the internal one, that he believed he was worth more than the $14.5 million. He had the self-worth, the internal conviction to hold out, regardless of the immediate economic pressure. The mindset instilled was walk in like you own it. But it was coupled with the discipline and the hustle to ensure he earned the right to own it. The economic cushion might have allowed the 20 months to physically happen, sure, but it was the mindset that created the opportunity for the transformation in the first place.
That mindset is undeniably powerful, but we still have to acknowledge the potential psychological cost. When high performance is essentially mandatory, and external validation is deliberately restricted by immediately humbling every achievement, you create potentially crushing internal pressure. This requires a level of self-mastery that might just be too fragile, too precarious to rely on as a universal blueprint. The high-performance expectation is constantly demanding, and without structured rest and reflection built into the system, it risks collapse. This specific approach seems to rely too heavily on constant action to define identity, leaving perhaps little room for adaptation when life inevitably demands stillness or a change of pace.
Look, I maintain that the philosophy presented coupling that relentless hustle and those high expectations with the bedrock of unconditional love provides a clear, though undoubtedly challenging path to forging resilient character. The career evidence strongly suggests that enduring resistance and prioritizing long-term integrity over immediate gain does create deep, lasting transformation, where self-worth becomes its own almost unshakable source of identity.
And while we agree entirely on the importance of endurance, and hustle certainly has its place, the specific methods utilized here, the extreme pressure, the effective shunning of cognitive rest, the harsh and volatile discipline, I believe they introduce unnecessary and often unmanageable structural risks. The true value of this approach might lie less in its sheer intensity and more in that foundational undercurrent of unconditional love and the instilled confidence. That provided the crucial safety net. Without that net, the discipline becomes far too precarious a model to endorse widely.
Right. We both agree, however, that the material offers a really complex and highly instructive lens into how extreme values and demanding choices shape a resilient mindset. And there is certainly much more to explore regarding the precise relationship between integrity, chaos, and self-belief within these accounts.